The morning sun peeked through the blinds as Andrew Wilson adjusted his tie in the mirror. Today was important. After sending out dozens of job applications in the past month, he finally had a real shot at his dream job. TechWave Innovations was known for cutting-edge software development, and Andrew knew he had exactly what they needed. Andrew looked at his reflection one last time. At 32, his face showed both determination and a hint of wariness. Experience had taught him to be careful with job applications. So many times before, enthusiasm on the phone turned cold during face-to-face meetings. Just focus on your skills, he reminded himself, straightening his shoulders. Andrew had graduated at the top of his class from one of the best engineering schools in the country. He had worked for big companies, created software that thousands of people used every day, and even had his name on 3 technology patents. His resume wasn't just good, it was exceptional. When applying to TechWave, Andrew had been strategic. His application showed his amazing achievements but included minimal personal details. No photo, just credentials. He wanted to be judged on his abilities alone. The response had come quickly. "Your qualifications are exactly what we're looking for," the email read. "We'd love to meet you in person." It was signed by Thomas Whitfield, the department manager. The enthusiastic tone gave Andrew hope that maybe this time would be different. Andrew's phone buzzed. It was his wife, Lisa. "Ready for the big interview?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Andrew replied, his voice a mix of hope and reservation. "You've got this," Lisa encouraged. "Remember what Uncle James always says, let your work speak for itself." Uncle James was more than just family. As the newly appointed CEO of Global Tech Enterprises, he was a giant in the industry. But he built his reputation from nothing, facing and overcoming the same barriers Andrew now encountered. James had offered to put in a good word for Andrew many times, but Andrew had always refused. "I need to do this on my own terms," he would say, "no shortcuts." What Andrew didn't know was that Uncle James's company had recently acquired TechWave Innovations. James had kept this quiet in family gatherings, knowing his nephew was job hunting in the tech sector. He wanted Andrew to succeed based on merit alone. The drive to the TechWave office took Andrew through downtown. He arrived 20 minutes early, parking his modest sedan between luxury cars. Inside the sleek glass building, Andrew approached the reception desk with confident steps. "Good morning," he greeted the receptionist with a warm smile. "I'm here for an interview with Mr. Whitfield at 10 o'clock. The young woman at the desk looked up, her friendly expression flickering for just a second when she saw Andrew. It was subtle, a brief pause, a quick reassessment, but Andrew caught it. He'd seen that look too many times before. "Oh, yes, Andrew Wilson," she confirmed, checking her computer. "Please have a seat. I'll let Mr. Whitfield know you're here." Andrew sat in the waiting area, reviewing notes on his tablet. The office buzzed with activity, people in business attire hurrying through the halls, the smell of coffee in the air, the distant sound of conversations and keyboard clicks. This could be his workplace soon, he thought. After 15 minutes, a door opened and a man in his late 40s emerged. Thomas Whitfield had salt and pepper hair and wore an expensive suit that emphasized his position of authority. He scanned the waiting area, passing over Andrew initially before doing a double take. "Mr. Wilson." Thomas called out, his tone noticeably cooler than the email suggested. Andrew stood up and extended his hand. "Yes, it's great to meet you, Mr. Whitfield. I've been looking forward to discussing the position." Thomas hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking Andrew's hand. The grip was loose, the connection brief. "Follow me," Thomas said curtly, turning without waiting for a response. As Andrew followed Thomas down the hallway toward the interview room, he could feel the shift in energy. Something had changed. The enthusiasm from their previous communications had vanished. In its place was a stiff formality that Andrew recognized all too well. Still, Andrew kept his hope alive. Maybe it was just interview nerves on both sides. After all, his qualifications spoke for themselves. He'd come prepared to show Thomas Whitfield exactly why he was the perfect candidate for this job, regardless of anything else. Little did either man know that this interview would be the beginning of a story that would change not just their lives, but the culture of an entire company. Thomas Whitfield led Andrew into a small meeting room with glass walls. The room felt colder than the rest of the office. Andrew placed his portfolio on the table while Thomas closed the door with a sharp click. "So," Thomas said without looking up from Andrew's printed resume, "you claim to have graduated from Brighton Tech." Andrew noticed the word claim right away. It stung, but he kept his expression neutral. "Yes, sir. Class of 2015. I was valedictorian that year," Andrew replied evenly. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. And these patents you've listed, all three are actually yours?" "Yes, sir. I developed an algorithm that helps online stores predict what customers will buy next. You can look them up in the National Patent Database." Andrew pulled out his tablet. "I can show you." "That won't be necessary," Thomas cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Let's move on to your work experience." For the next 20 minutes, the pattern continued. Thomas questioned every achievement on Andrew's resume with thinly veiled disbelief. What had started as an interview gradually became more like an interrogation. When they reached the technical portion of the interview, Andrew felt a flicker of hope. This was his chance to prove himself beyond any doubt. "Let's see how you handle a real problem," Thomas said, sliding a whiteboard marker across the table. "Show me how you'd optimize a database search function when dealing with over 10 million entries." Andrew stood up and uncapped the marker. Despite the tension in the room, he felt confident. This was his element. He worked through the problem step by step, explaining his thought process clearly. His solution was elegant and efficient, something that would normally impress any technical interviewer. When Andrew finished, he turned to see Thomas typing something on his phone, barely paying attention. "That's one approach," Thomas commented vaguely, without addressing any specific part of Andrew's solution. Andrew returned to his seat, a knot forming in his stomach. He'd seen this before, the disinterest, the dismissal, the way Thomas seemed to have made up his mind before Andrew even opened his mouth. "Your technical skills seem adequate," Thomas said, still not making eye contact. "But TechWave isn't just about coding. We need people who fit our company culture. Team dynamics are important to us." The words company culture and team dynamics hum in the air between them. Andrew had heard these phrases before. They often translated to, "You don't look like us." "I understand," Andrew said carefully. "In my previous roles, I've always been praised for my teamwork and communication skills. My last performance review specifically mentioned how I helped integrate new team members and improved group productivity." Thomas checked his watch. "Well, Mr. Wilson, I think I've seen enough for today." The interview had lasted barely 30 minutes. Andrew knew from the job listing that technical interviews at TechWave typically ran for at least an hour, often longer. "We have several other candidates to consider," Thomas continued, standing up abruptly. "We'll be in touch if we decide to move forward." "If, not when." Andrew recognized the brush-off for what it was. "Thank you for your time," Andrew said, extending his hand again. Thomas shook it briefly, his palm barely making contact before pulling away. "The receptionist will show you out." As they walked back to the lobby, Andrew noticed people watching from their desks. A few looked away quickly when he made eye contact. Had they seen this scene play out before? At the reception desk, Thomas nodded curtly. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Wilson. We'll be in touch." Without waiting for a response, Thomas turned and disappeared down the hallway, already checking his phone for his next appointment. The receptionist gave Andrew a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Do you need a parking validation?" "Yes, please," Andrew said quietly. As she stamped his ticket, Andrew glanced around the office one more time. The modern space with its sleek furniture and inspirational posters about innovation and diversity now seemed hollow. Outside in the parking lot, Andrew loosened his tie and took a deep breath. The familiar feeling of disappointment was there, but something else burned alongside it: determination. He wouldn't let this experience define him. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. How did it go? Andrew stared at the message for a moment before replying, about as expected. "Let's talk when I get home." What Andrew didn't know as he drove away was that this rejection would set in motion events that neither he nor Thomas could have anticipated. The true test of character for both men was just beginning. Andrew pulled into his driveway just as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the neighborhood. The familiar sight of his modest two-bedroom home usually brought comfort, but today his mind was still stuck in that cold interview room. Lisa opened the door before he could even reach for his keys. One look at his face told her everything. "That bad, huh?" she asked, giving him a tight hug. Andrew sighed. Same old story, different company. Inside, he loosened his tie and sank onto the couch. Lisa brought him a glass of water and sat beside him, waiting patiently for him to share. "The guy basically questioned every single thing on my resume," Andrew finally said. "Like I was making it all up. When I aced the technical problem, he couldn't even look me in the eye. Just said I wasn't a good cultural fit." Lisa shook her head, anger flashing across her face. "You know what that means?" "Yeah," Andrew said quietly. "I know." The phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Andrew checked the screen and his expression softened. "It's Uncle James," he told Lisa before answering. "Hey, Uncle Jay." "Andrew, how's my favorite nephew?" James's deep, warm voice boomed through the speaker. At 62, James Wilson was a force of nature, a self-made man who had started coding in his garage and built one of the biggest tech companies in the country. "I'm your only nephew," Andrew laughed, some of the day's tension easing from his shoulders. Details. Listen, I'm calling about that security software you developed last year. Global Tech is looking at integrating something similar for our new banking clients. Got time to talk shop?" Andrew sat up straighter, professional mode engaging despite his earlier disappointment. Always have time for that. For the next 15 minutes, they discussed technical specifications and potential applications. Uncle James had always respected Andrew's expertise, treating him as a valued colleague rather than just a younger relative. As their conversation wound down, James asked, "So, how's the job hunt going? Any promising leads?" Andrew hesitated. He had always been honest with his uncle but had never used their relationship for special treatment. Had an interview today, actually, at a place called TechWave Innovations. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "TechWave? Interesting. How did it go?" "Not great," Andrew admitted. "The interview was, well, let's just say I don't think I'll be getting a call back." "What happened?" James's tone had shifted slightly. Andrew gave him a quick rundown of the interview with Thomas Whitfield. He kept it factual, avoiding assumptions about Thomas's motives, but the picture was clear enough. "I see," James said when Andrew finished. His voice had a careful neutrality that Andrew rarely heard. "That's very interesting timing." "Why's that?" Andrew asked. James cleared his throat. "I wasn't going to mention this yet since it's still not public information, but Global Tech acquired TechWave about 3 months ago. They're one of our new subsidiaries." Andrew nearly dropped his phone. "What? You own TechWave?" "We do. It was a quiet acquisition. The management teams haven't been fully integrated yet. Most of TechWave's employees probably don't even know they're working for Global Tech now." Andrew's mind raced. "So Thomas Whitfield reports to our board now," yes, James confirmed, though he might not fully appreciate that fact yet. Lisa, who had been listening to Andrew's side of the conversation, raised her eyebrows questioningly. Andrew mouthed, "I'll tell you later," before returning to the call. "I didn't know," Andrew said simply. "I wouldn't have applied if I'd known there was a connection." "And that's exactly why I didn't tell you," James replied. "You've always wanted to make it on your own merits. I respect that." There was a thoughtful silence before James spoke again. "You know, Andrew, I have to attend a board meeting at TechWave next week. The quarterly review. First time I'll be there in person since the acquisition." "Okay," Andrew said, not sure where his uncle was going with this. "I've been looking for someone with your specific technical expertise to advise me on their development division. Someone who could give an honest assessment of their operations and personnel." Andrew's pulse quickened. "Are you offering me a job?" "Not exactly," James said, and Andrew could hear the smile in his voice. "I'm offering you a chance to see how Thomas Whitfield reacts when he realizes who you really are. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to change how things work at TechWave." Andrew glanced at Lisa, who was watching him with curious eyes. A slow smile spread across his face as he considered his uncle's proposition. "When's the meeting?" he asked. "Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. sharp." I'll be there, Andrew said, a new determination in his voice. And Uncle James? Thank you. After hanging up, Andrew turned to Lisa with a gleam in his eye that she hadn't seen since before the interview. What was that all about? She asked. Remember how I thought today was the end of something? Andrew replied, his spirits lifting. Turns out it might just be the beginning. Tuesday morning arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze. Andrew stood before his closet, choosing his outfit with extra care. This wasn't just any meeting, it was a chance to right a wrong. The navy suit, Lisa suggested from the doorway, coffee mug in hand. It makes you look like the executive you are. Andrew nodded, pulling out the suit. Not an executive yet, he said with a small smile. Only a matter of time, Lisa replied, her confidence in him unwavering. An hour later, Andrew walked through the same glass doors of TechWave Innovations. This time, however, he wasn't there to ask for a job. He was there as an advisor to the CEO of the parent company. The same receptionist sat at the front desk. Her eyes widened slightly as she recognized him. Good morning, Andrew said pleasantly. I'm here for the board meeting with James Wilson. Mr. Wilson, she repeated, confusion evident on her face. You're here for the meeting with the CEO of Global Tech. That's right, Andrew confirmed calmly. He should be expecting me. The receptionist quickly checked her computer, her fingers trembling slightly. Yes, I see you're on the list. Andrew Wilson. Her voice trailed off as she made the connection. Wilson. As in. James is my uncle, Andrew said simply. The woman's face flushed. Of course, Mr. Wilson. The meeting is in the main conference room on the top floor. Would you like me to show you the way? I think I can find it, Andrew said. Thank you. As he walked to the elevator, Andrew could feel the receptionist's eyes following him. By the time he reached the top floor, word of his arrival would likely be spreading throughout the building. The conference room was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. Several people in business attire mingled around a table laden with coffee and pastries. Andrew spotted his uncle immediately. James Wilson commanded attention without even trying, his tall frame and confident posture drawing eyes wherever he went. Andrew, James called out, waving him over, right on time. As Andrew approached, James put an arm around his shoulders and turned to address the small group of people nearby. Everyone, I'd like you to meet my nephew, Andrew Wilson. He's one of the brightest software engineers I know, holds 3 patents already. He'll be observing today and advising me on some technical matters. The board members and executives greeted Andrew warmly, shaking his hand and making polite conversation. It was quite different from his reception just days ago. The meeting will start in about 10 minutes, James said, checking his watch. Andrew, help yourself to some coffee. I need to review some numbers with the CFO. Andrew poured himself a cup of coffee and stood by the windows, taking in the view. The door to the conference room opened, and Andrew turned to see who had entered. Thomas Whitfield walked in, head down, reviewing notes on his tablet. He looked confident, completely unaware of what awaited him. Andrew stayed where he was, watching as Thomas greeted some board members and took a seat near the head of the table. Thomas hadn't noticed him yet, and Andrew decided to wait. The moment would come soon enough. As more people filed in, Andrew took a seat beside his uncle at the head of the table. James gave him a reassuring nod as he called the meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me yet, I'm James Wilson, CEO of Global Tech Enterprises. We acquired TechWave 3 months ago, and I'm pleased to finally meet with you all in person. Thomas Whitfield sat up straighter, his expression attentive as he watched James. His eyes briefly scanned the people at the table, landing on Andrew for just a moment before moving on. Then, like a delayed reaction, his gaze snapped back to Andrew. The recognition dawned slowly on Thomas's face. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally the blood drained from his cheeks as he realized who was sitting at the head of the table. Andrew met his gaze evenly, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. Thomas quickly looked away, fumbling with his pen. Before we dive into the quarterly reports, James continued, I'd like to introduce my special advisor on technical acquisitions, Andrew Wilson. Some of you might recognize him from his work on predictive algorithms. Others, James paused, his eyes briefly meeting Thomas, might recognize him from other contexts. The room was silent. Thomas stared at his notepad, a light sheen of sweat visible on his forehead. Andrew will be evaluating our technical departments and making recommendations for integration with Global Tech's existing systems, James explained. I expect everyone to give him their full cooperation. Thomas's hands were visibly shaking now. He reached for his water glass but knocked it over instead, sending water spilling across his papers. Several people jumped up to help, offering napkins and moving documents out of the way. Are you feeling well, Mr. Whitfield? James asked, his tone concerned but his eyes knowing. You look a bit pale. I'm fine, Thomas managed, dabbing at the wet papers. Just a bit surprised by some of the new developments. Change can be difficult, James agreed, but often necessary. Now let's begin with department reports. Mr. Whitfield, I believe you're first on the agenda. As Thomas rose unsteadily to his feet, clutching his damp notes, Andrew caught his eye once more. The man who had dismissed him so easily days ago now looked as though he might collapse from anxiety. Andrew didn't feel the satisfaction he had expected. Instead, he felt a sense of responsibility, a chance to address something bigger than just one bad interview. Thomas started his presentation, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. Every time he glanced at Andrew, he stumbled over his words. The board members exchanged confused looks, unused to seeing their usually polished department head so flustered. For Andrew, sitting quietly beside his uncle, this was just the beginning. The real conversation would come after the meeting, and that conversation would change not just Thomas Whitfield's perspective, but potentially the future of the entire company. The board meeting dragged on for 2 hours, with Thomas stumbling through his presentation like a man walking on ice. By the time James called for a break, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes, James announced. As people filed out, he added, Mr. Whitfield, could you stay behind? My advisor and I would like to discuss your department in more detail. Thomas froze halfway out of his chair. His eyes darted between James and Andrew, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Of course, he managed, sinking back down. When the room had emptied, James closed the door and turned to Thomas. I think we need to have an honest conversation. Thomas straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. Mr. Wilson, if this is about the quarterly numbers, I can explain the dip in productivity. We've been transitioning to a new project management system and... This isn't about the numbers, James interrupted, his voice calm but firm. It's about how you treated my nephew during his job interview last week. Thomas's face went through a series of expressions, surprise, denial, then resignation. I don't know what you mean. Andrew, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. I think you do, Thomas. You questioned every qualification on my resume. You barely looked at my solution to your technical problem. And you ended the interview in half the usual time, saying I wasn't a good cultural fit. Does that sound familiar? Thomas swallowed hard. There might have been a misunderstanding. We interview dozens of candidates every month. It's a rigorous process, and not everyone. Please don't insult my intelligence, Andrew said quietly. We both know what happened in that room. Thomas's shoulders slumped. Look, it wasn't. I didn't. He stopped, unable to find the right excuse. James pulled out his phone and placed it on the table. When Andrew told me about his experience, I became concerned. So I did some research. He swiped through a few screens. In the past year, TechWave has interviewed 47 candidates from diverse backgrounds. Can you guess how many were hired? Thomas remained silent. 3, James continued. 3 out of 47. Meanwhile, 18 out of 29 candidates from, let's say, more traditional backgrounds were offered positions. That's quite a statistical anomaly, wouldn't you agree? The hiring process is complex, Thomas muttered. There are many factors. Yes, there are, Andrew cut in. Skills, experience, education, problem-solving ability. I met or exceeded every requirement for the position. Yet somehow, I wasn't a cultural fit. Thomas looked down at his hands. The room fell silent for a long moment. I want to ask you something, Andrew finally said, and I'd appreciate an honest answer. If you had known who I was, who my family was, would you have treated me the same way? Thomas's face flushed. That's not fair. Neither is judging people based on how they look rather than what they can do, Andrew replied evenly. But I'm not here to shame you. I'm genuinely curious. Thomas looked up, meeting Andrew's eyes for the first time. No, he admitted quietly. I probably wouldn't have. Andrew nodded, accepting the truth. Thank you for being honest. James cleared his throat. I should tell you, Thomas, that I recorded our conversation just now. Thomas's eyes widened in alarm. You can't. I can, James corrected him. TechWave's employee handbook clearly states that meetings in this room may be recorded for training and evaluation purposes. Page 43, if you want to check. Thomas slumped back in his chair, defeat written across his face. So what happens now? Are you firing me? To Thomas's surprise, Andrew shook his head. That's not why I'm here. James nodded in agreement. Firing you would be easy, but it wouldn't solve the real problem. Thomas looked confused. I don't understand. Andrew leaned forward. I could have let you walk into this meeting completely unaware. I could have watched you panic when you realized who I was. I could have enjoyed seeing you get fired on the spot. But what would that accomplish? He gestured around the room. Next week, someone else would be sitting in your chair, maybe with the same biases but better at hiding them. The problem isn't just you, Thomas. It's a culture that's been allowed to develop here. James placed a folder on the table. Inside this folder are resumes of 10 highly qualified candidates who were rejected by TechWave in the past 6 months. Half of them are already working for our competitors. All of them could have made valuable contributions here. Thomas opened the folder and flipped through the resumes, his expression growing more troubled with each page. You have 2 options, James continued. Option 1, resignation, effective immediately. Thomas tensed, waiting for the second option. Option 2, Andrew said, you work with me to fix this. Real change, not just window dressing. We implement blind recruitment processes. We provide training on recognizing unconscious bias. We create mentorship programs for underrepresented groups in tech. Thomas looked up in surprise. You want me to work with you? Sometimes the people who need to learn the most are the ones who think they already know everything, Andrew replied. You made a mistake with me. Now you have a chance to make it right, not just for me, but for everyone who comes after me. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing what he'd heard. Why would you give me this chance? He finally asked. After how I treated you. Andrew's expression was thoughtful. Because firing you would be about punishment. Working with you could be about progress. Thomas looked down at the resumes again, then back up at Andrew and James. For the first time since the meeting began, his face showed something beyond fear, a glimmer of understanding. I'll need some time to think, he said quietly. James nodded. Take the rest of the day. We'll expect your decision by tomorrow morning. As Thomas gathered his things to leave, Andrew caught his eye. Thomas? Whatever you decide, remember that this isn't just about saving your job. It's about what kind of person you want to be going forward. Thomas paused at the door, nodded once, and left without another word. James turned to Andrew with a proud smile. That was not what I expected you to say. Andrew shrugged. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. Outside the window, the city sprawled before them, full of buildings and businesses just like this one. Andrew wondered how many other Thomas Whitfields were out there and how many talented people had been turned away because of what they looked like rather than what they could do. Change had to start somewhere. Maybe today, in this room, they had taken the first step. The next morning, Andrew arrived at TechWave earlier than necessary. He barely slept, turning over possibilities in his mind. Would Thomas take the easy way out and resign? Or would he accept the harder path of working to change both himself and the company culture? Andrew sat in the small office James had assigned him, reviewing hiring data from the past 3 years. The patterns were even clearer with more information. Qualified candidates from diverse backgrounds consistently passed over, often with the same vague reasons noted. Not a team player. Communication concerns. Cultural fit issues. The excuses changed, but the results remained the same. A knock on the door pulled Andrew from his thoughts. He looked up to see Thomas standing in the doorway, looking like he hadn't slept either. Can I come in? Thomas asked. Andrew nodded, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Thomas sat down, his normally perfect appearance slightly rumpled. He placed a sealed envelope on the desk between them. "Is that your resignation?" Andrew asked, eyeing the envelope. Thomas shook his head. "It's my answer. But before you open it, I'd like to say something." Andrew leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening." Thomas took a deep breath. "I went home yesterday and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Really looked. I've always thought of myself as a good person. Fair, professional." He paused. "But the numbers don't lie, do they?" "They rarely do," Andrew agreed quietly. "I didn't sleep much." Thomas continued. "I kept thinking about what you said, about this being about the kind of person I want to be going forward. And I realized something uncomfortable." He met Andrew's eyes. "I've been judging people without even knowing I was doing it." Andrew nodded but remained silent, letting Thomas continue. "My dad ran a small tech shop when I was growing up," Thomas said. "He always hired people who looked like him, talked like him. He said it was about knowing what you're getting. I guess I absorbed more of that thinking than I realized." Thomas gestured to the envelope. "So that's not my resignation, it's a proposal. If you're serious about wanting to work together, I have some ideas about where we could start." Andrew raised his eyebrows in surprise before reaching for the envelope. Inside was a 5-page document titled "Restructuring TechWave's Hiring Process, a Proposal for Change." As Andrew skimmed the pages, Thomas explained, "It's just a starting point. Blind initial resume screening, standardized interview questions, diverse interview panels, training programs." He shrugged. "I'm not an expert, but I did some research last night." Andrew looked up from the proposal. "This is unexpected." "In a good way, I hope," Thomas said, uncertainty in his voice. Andrew nodded slowly. "It's a start." He set the proposal aside. "But understand this. I'm not here to make you feel better about what happened. This isn't about absolution, it's about action." "I understand," Thomas replied. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to do better." The door opened and James walked in. "Good morning, gentlemen. Have we reached a decision?" Andrew held up the proposal. "Thomas has decided to stay and work on implementing changes." James looked pleased but cautious. "That's good to hear. But I want to be clear, this isn't just about making nice with my nephew. I expect real results, measurable changes in hiring and retention within 6 months." Thomas straightened in his chair. "Yes, sir, I understand." "Good," James said, "because I'm putting Andrew in charge of a new division here, technical innovation and inclusion. He'll be reporting directly to me, and you'll be working under his supervision initially." Andrew hadn't expected this. "Uncle James." "This isn't nepotism," James cut him off. "This is putting the right person in the right position. You've earned it. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "the job you originally applied for was beneath your qualifications anyway." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Andrew set up shop in a corner office with glass walls, visibility and transparency being his first symbolic changes. Thomas worked alongside him, often staying late to review applications that had previously been rejected. One evening, as they were preparing for the next day's diversity training session, Thomas paused in his work. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice hesitant. Andrew looked up from his computer. "Sure." "That day in the interview, how did you stay so calm? If I'd been in your position, I don't think I could have kept my composure." Andrew was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't my first experience like that," he finally said. "Probably won't be my last. You learn to manage your reactions because getting angry just confirms their biases." Thomas winced. That's not right. Having to hide your feelings just so." "No, it's not right," Andrew agreed. "That's why we're doing this work." They continued working in silence for a while before Thomas spoke again. "You know, the strangest thing has happened these past few weeks. The team seems, I don't know, more energized. People are bringing ideas to meetings who never spoke up before." Andrew smiled. "Amazing what happens when everyone feels valued, isn't it?" The phone on Andrew's desk rang. It was Lisa. "Don't forget, dinner with my parents tonight," she reminded him. "They want to hear all about the new job." "I'll be home in 20 minutes, Andrew promised. As he gathered his things to leave, Thomas asked, "Do you think this will actually work?" changing how an entire company thinks. Andrew paused at the door. One person at a time, one decision at a time. Change has to start somewhere. He gestured around the office, where new hiring protocols were pinned to bulletin boards and diverse candidate resumes covered the conference table. This looks like a pretty good somewhere to me. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. See you tomorrow, boss. Andrew smiled at the title, not because of the authority it represented, but because of what it symbolized. A world where people were judged by their abilities rather than appearances was possible. It wouldn't happen overnight, and it wouldn't be easy. But as he walked to his car under the evening sky, Andrew felt something he hadn't felt in a long time about the future of his career. Hope. 1 year had passed since that fateful interview day. The seasons had changed, people had grown, and TechWave had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Andrew stood at the podium in the company's largest conference room, which was filled to capacity. Employees, industry leaders, and even a few reporters had gathered for TechWave's first annual Diversity in Tech site. Behind him, a large screen displayed the company's new slogan, Innovation Through Inclusion. When I first walked through TechWave's doors, Andrew began, his voice calm and clear. I wasn't welcomed. In fact, I was shown the door pretty quickly. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. The story had become something of a legend within the company. But today, I'm proud to say that TechWave has become a different place. In the past year, we've increased diversity in our hiring by 63%. More importantly, we've created an environment where everyone's ideas are valued. From his spot near the front, Thomas watched Andrew with genuine admiration. The past year had been challenging for him, facing his own biases, rebuilding his reputation, learning to see talent in new ways. There had been days when he'd wanted to quit, when the process of changing lifelong thought patterns seemed impossible. But here he was, still standing. Andrew gestured toward a group of people seated in the front row. I'd like to recognize our newly formed Inclusion Council, who have worked tirelessly to implement our blind recruitment process and mentorship programs. The audience applauded as the council members stood briefly. They represented a cross-section of backgrounds and experiences, exactly what TechWave had been missing before. None of this would have been possible, Andrew continued, without the support of our CEO, my uncle James Wilson, who believed that changing company culture wasn't just the right thing to do, it was also good business. James nodded from his seat, a proud smile on his face. Under his leadership, Global Tech had begun implementing similar changes across all its subsidiaries using TechWave as a model. But there's one person who deserves special recognition, Andrew said, his tone shifting slightly. Someone who had the courage to face his own mistakes and work to correct them. Thomas Whitfield, would you please join me on stage? A murmur of surprise ran through the audience. Many knew the backstory, how Thomas had initially rejected Andrew and how they'd ended up working together. But few expected this public acknowledgement. Thomas hesitated before slowly making his way to the stage. As he approached the podium, Andrew extended his hand. The handshake they shared was nothing like their first one a year ago. This one was firm, warm, and genuine. Thomas could have chosen the easy path, Andrew told the audience. He could have resigned and found another job where he wouldn't have to face his biases. Instead, he chose the harder road of learning and growth. Thomas stepped up to the microphone, visibly moved. Thank you, Andrew. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've worked in tech for over 20 years, and I always prided myself on recognizing talent. But I've learned that we all have blind spots, areas where our judgment is clouded by things we don't even realize. He looked out at the diverse faces watching him. A year ago, I nearly cost this company one of its most valuable assets because I couldn't see past my own preconceptions. That would have been just one more example of the talent that walks out our doors every day in companies across this country. Thomas turned to Andrew. Working with you has been one of the most challenging and rewarding experiences of my career. You had every reason to want me gone, but instead, you showed me a better way forward. After the presentations concluded, people mingled in small groups, discussing the changes at TechWave and the initiatives presented. Lisa had joined Andrew, her hand resting comfortably in his. Your speech was perfect, she said, pride evident in her voice. Though you left out the part where you paced around our living room for 3 hours practicing it. Andrew laughed. Some details are best kept private. James approached them, clapping Andrew on the shoulder. The board is impressed. TechWave's productivity is up 20% since you came on board. Turns out having diverse perspectives actually leads to better products. Who would have thought? He added with good-natured sarcasm. Uncle James, you're turning into a true believer, Andrew teased. I always believed in talent, James replied. I just needed my favorite nephew to show me how much of it we were missing. Across the room, Thomas was speaking with a young man and woman, new hires from the recent recruitment drive. That animated conversation about a project improvement caught Andrew's attention. Excuse me, Andrew said to his wife and uncle. There's something I need to do. He made his way across the room to where Thomas stood with the new team members. Andrew. Thomas greeted him. Have you met Rage and Keisha? They've developed an amazing new approach to the security protocol we've been struggling with. Andrew shook hands with both of them. I've seen your proposal. Impressive work. After they chatted briefly, the two young engineers moved on to speak with other colleagues, leaving Andrew and Thomas alone. They wouldn't be here if not for the changes we made, Thomas said quietly. Andrew nodded. And those changes wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been willing to do the work. Thomas looked around the room thoughtfully. Sometimes I think about that day, the interview. As terrible as I feel about how I treated you, I wonder if things would have changed if I just hired you. If I hadn't made that mistake, would we be standing here now with all of this happening? Andrew considered this. Maybe not. Sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to create real change. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the room full of people from different backgrounds, sharing ideas and building connections. So what's next? Thomas asked. You've transformed TechWave in a year. What's your plan for year 2? Andrew smiled. Global Tech has over 30 subsidiaries. My uncle thinks they could all benefit from what we've learned here. Sounds like a big job, Thomas remarked. Too big for one person, Andrew agreed. I was thinking I might need a partner. Someone who's been through the process and knows the pitfalls. Someone who's made mistakes but learned from them. Thomas looked at him in surprise. Are you offering me a promotion? I'm offering you a chance to take what you've learned here and help other companies change too. Andrew clarified. It won't be easy. There are plenty of other Thomas Whitfields out there who don't know they need to change. Thomas extended his hand. In that case, I accept. As they shook hands, Andrew thought about the journey that had brought them here, from rejection to recognition, from bias to breakthrough. One interview had changed not just 2 lives, but an entire company culture. And now that change would spread further. Outside the windows of the conference room, the sun was setting on one chapter and rising on another. The work wasn't done, not by a long shot. But for today, it was enough to celebrate how far they'd come, and to know that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the most painful moments.